I never thought something as simple as a fence could cause a war in my neighborhood. But then again, I had never lived next to Karen before. You know the type, always nosy, always entitled, always thinking the rules never applied to her. My fence was solid, sturdy, and placed exactly on the property line, not an inch over. I had built it not just for privacy, but because I valued having my space respected. Unfortunately, Karen didn't see it that way. It all started when I noticed a section of my fence leaning oddly one morning. At first, I thought maybe it was just the wind or a tree branch that had fallen. But when I walked over, I saw something far worse. My fence wasn't just leaning, it had been ripped apart. Planks were broken, nails scattered across the grass, and right in the middle of it all was a new dirt path leading directly into Karen's yard. I stood there, stunned. It was like a scene out of a movie. Someone had deliberately torn through my property to create their own personal shortcut, and I didn't need to hire a detective to figure out who it was. Karen lived right next door, and she had always complained about how inconvenient it was to walk all the way around the block to get to the other side of the neighborhood. Apparently, her solution was to destroy my fence and carve a path straight through my yard. The first time I confronted her, I tried to keep calm. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, she acted surprised to see me. "Oh, hey neighbor," she said, smiling like nothing had happened. I pointed out the obvious damage, the gaping hole in my fence, and the fact that her yard connected perfectly to the destruction. She didn't deny it. In fact, she had the audacity to shrug and say, "Well, it's just a fence. It's not like I stole anything." That was the moment I realized I was dealing with someone who didn't care about boundaries, literal or otherwise. She told me she needed the shortcut because her morning walks took too long. She said I was being selfish by blocking off community convenience. And when I told her I expected her to pay for the damages, she laughed. She actually laughed in my face and said, "Good luck with that." I replaced the fence, reinforced it, and even put up a camera to catch any future nonsense. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would get the message. But Karen wasn't the kind of person who backed down. A week later, I heard the sound of wood cracking in the middle of the night. By the time I got outside, the damage was done again. The shortcut had returned wider this time, and Karen was already walking through it with her little dog like she owned the place. That was the night I decided this wasn't just about a fence anymore. This was about respect. And if she wasn't going to respect me, then I would make sure she had no choice. I started digging into property records, boundaries, easements, and county maps. I spent hours at the local clerk's office learning everything I could about the land division in our neighborhood. And that's when I discovered something Karen clearly hadn't thought about. The strip of land she was cutting through wasn't just my yard, it was technically a boundary parcel that could be purchased. It was small, narrow, and overlooked by most people, but it was valuable to me because it meant control. I filed the paperwork, paid the fee, and within a month, that strip of land officially belonged to me. Every inch of the shortcut was now legally mine, and I had the right to do whatever I wanted with it. The day the deed arrived in the mail was the day my plan really began. Instead of simply rebuilding the fence, I installed a new one, taller, stronger, and locked from my side. I even added a gate with a heavy chain just to drive the point home. Suddenly, Karen's shortcut wasn't just gone, it was a dead end. She could try to use it all she wanted, but she wasn't getting through. The first time she saw it, I'll never forget the look on her face. She came storming over, red-faced and furious, shouting about how I couldn't just block her in like that. But the best part? Because when she destroyed my fence and trespassed on my land, she gave me the motivation to take full ownership of the one thing she thought she could control. That was just the beginning. She had no idea how far I was willing to go to make sure she never messed with me again. When I woke up the next morning, I thought maybe, just maybe, it had all been a bad dream. But when I stepped out into my yard with a cup of coffee in hand, there it was. The fence was gone. It's completely gone. Wooden posts yanked out of the ground. Panels scattered like broken matchsticks. A trail of boot prints cut right through my yard, trampling my flower bed. It wasn't just damage, it was deliberate destruction. I stood there, gripping my coffee mug so tight I thought it might shatter. That fence wasn't just wood. It was my property line, my boundary, my security. And someone had the audacity to rip it down in the middle of the night like it was nothing. I knew exactly who it was. Karen. Sure enough, when I looked toward her house, she was outside, watering her plants with a smug little smile plastered on her face. She even waved at me like this was some kind of neighborly morning greeting. My jaw clenched. "Karen," I called, striding toward her. "Did you tear down my fence?" She looked me dead in the eye and said, "That fence was blocking the natural flow of the neighborhood. It was ugly and unnecessary. I did you a favor." I almost laughed. A favor. She destroyed something I spent thousands of dollars building, and she called it a favor. "You had no right," I snapped. Her smile didn't falter. "I had every right. This neighborhood was designed to be open. Your fence cut off the shortcut. People like to walk through here. I've restored what was always meant to be." I couldn't believe her arrogance. "Karen, this is private property, my property. You destroyed it, and that's trespassing and vandalism. You can't just decide what's meant to be." She shrugged. "Go ahead and call the cops. They won't do anything. Everyone in this neighborhood agrees with me. That shortcut saves people time, and you were being selfish." My blood boiled. Selfish. I put up a fence to protect my land, to give myself privacy, to keep people from stomping through my yard. You don't get to decide how I live on my property. Karen smirked. "Oh, but I already did." And with that, she turned her back on me and walked inside her house. I stood there, fuming. Later, that day, I did call the police. 2 officers came, looked at the wreckage, took my statement, and even walked over to talk to Karen. But when they came back, they shook their heads. "She admitted to removing the fence," one officer said, "but she claims she thought it was a community boundary issue and not private property. Technically, this could be a civil matter." Civil matter, the phrase stung. In other words, they weren't going to do anything. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Karen had destroyed my property in broad daylight, rather. In the middle of the night, and she was going to get away with it because she played it off as some boundary dispute. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers I kept from when I bought the property. The deeds, the maps, the survey lines. My eyes kept going back to one detail, something I had skimmed over before, but never really thought about. The boundary markers extended a little farther than where I'd built my fence, and that's when an idea began to form. Karen thought she had outsmarted me. She thought the neighborhood was on her side and that I was powerless. But what if I wasn't powerless? What if I used the one thing she couldn't fight against: legal ownership? I didn't say a word to her the next day. I didn't confront her. Instead, I made an appointment with a property lawyer. I walked into his office with my papers, spread them across his desk, and asked, "How much of this land is actually mine?" He studied the documents, compared the measurements, then pulled up county records. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and said, "It looks like you own not just this yard, but also the strip of land that Karen and her friends have been using as a shortcut. It's all legally yours." I couldn't help but grin. So, if I wanted to, I could build anything I wanted there. A new fence. A wall. The lawyer nodded. "Absolutely. In fact, you'd be well within your rights to restrict access. No one could stop you." A plan clicked into place. And for the first time since Karen tore down my fence, I felt hope. Actually, no, why I felt something stronger than hope. I felt power. Karen thought she had me cornered. But she had no idea that by tearing down my fence, she had opened the door for me to do something much, much worse for her. Because I wasn't just going to rebuild the fence, I was going to buy more land. The land surrounding her property. And once I did, I'd have the power to lock her in. I never realized how much damage one neighbor could cause until Karen escalated her war on my property. After the police visit and the warning she got, I thought she'd finally stop. Most people would have been embarrassed, maybe even humbled, by being called out and threatened with charges. But Karen, she doubled down. It started with small acts of pettiness. I'd wake up in the morning and find piles of trash tossed into my yard, fast food bags, empty soda cans, broken branches. She thought she was being slick, doing it late at night, but my security cameras caught everything. The footage showed her sneaking through the hole she'd smashed into my old fence, tossing garbage with this smug little grin. One night, she even dragged a full trash bag and ripped it open across my lawn, like she was marking territory. Watching her on the footage made my blood boil, but I didn't take the bait. I filed another report with the HOA, attaching the videos, but as usual, they told me, we'll look into it. A week later, things took another turn. My newly repaired fence, the one I spent time and money building back stronger, was mysteriously splashed with paint. Neon pink paint, dripping down the wood like some bizarre graffiti. Of course, it wasn't random. The paint can was conveniently discarded right next to her yard, and when I knocked on her door, she opened it with paint still smeared on her hands. She didn't even deny it. She just smirked and said, maybe if you didn't build walls where people need to walk, you wouldn't have problems. That was it. That one line. She wasn't just being careless or angry anymore. She was openly admitting that my fence being in her way was a personal affront. And she thought she had the right to destroy it. So I made a decision. If she wanted a war, I'd give her one, but not the kind she expected. I started researching property laws, HOA bylaws, and land ownership regulations late into the night. That's when I discovered something fascinating: the boundary between. Her property and mine had originally been owned by the developer, but later sold off in pieces. My lot had technically ended a few feet before the fence line. And the strip of land Karen always used as her shortcut was actually unclaimed. That tiny strip of land was the key. If I could purchase it, I wouldn't just have the right to put up a fence side on the ground she was trespassing on. She wouldn't be able to touch it without committing a crime. I called the county office, tracked down the paperwork, and to my surprise, no one had touched that piece of land in decades. It was practically worthless to anyone else, but to me, it was priceless. Within a few weeks, I had signed the paperwork and bought it outright. That little sliver of land became mine. The day I got the deed in my hands, I started planning. I hired a contractor to build not just a fence, but a tall, reinforced barrier with steel posts sunk deep into the ground. This time, it wasn't just about keeping her out, it was about making a statement. The contractors worked quickly, and by the end of the week, towering wall separated my yard from hers. But here's the kicker. By buying the boundary, I had also cut off her shortcut. Completely. She used to walk through my yard to get to the back street, but now she had no access. The only way she could leave her house from that side was to walk all the way around the block. The day she realized what I'd done was pure gold. She came, stomping out of her house in her robe and slippers, clutching her coffee mug like it was a weapon. She marched straight to the wall, pounding on it with her fists, screaming, "You can't do this. You can't block me in like this." I calmly stepped outside, deed in hand, and said, "Actually, Karen, I can." And I did. This land is mine now. You set foot on it, you're trespassing. The look on her face was priceless. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes went wide, and then she launched into a tirade of insults I won't repeat here. But the best part? She was stuck. She had no way to tear it down this time without committing a serious crime, and I had the legal papers to back me up. That was the day the tables turned. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one with power. I was, and I wasn't done yet. The days after the surveyor's report were a blur of meetings, calls, and paperwork. What started as a nuisance had escalated into a battle of wills. The survey had confirmed what I already suspected. The fence Karen destroyed wasn't just mine. It marked the clear legal boundary of my property. And the path she had so smugly carved out for herself led straight across land she had no right to step foot on. Armed with the survey results, I went to the county office. That's when the real game began. I discovered something Karen clearly hadn't bothered to check. The strip of land she had been using as her personal shortcut wasn't actually part of her property or anyone's in the HOA. For that matter, it was an overlooked sliver, a forgotten boundary piece that had been left out when the developers mapped the neighborhood decades ago. And because it wasn't tied to her deed or the HOA's jurisdiction, it was available. So I bought it. I'll never forget the look on the clerk's face when I filed the purchase. She glanced at the papers, then back at me, probably wondering why anyone would go through the trouble of buying a narrow stretch of land that couldn't even fit a shed. But to me, it wasn't just land. It was leverage. It was justice. The paperwork took about a week to finalize, and in that time, Karen kept using the shortcut as if nothing had changed. She strutted across the gap like a queen parading through her territory, never once imagining the ground beneath her feet no longer belonged to her. Every time I saw her walk through, I bit my tongue, knowing the reveal would be worth it. When the deed finally came through, I wasted no time. I built a new fence, bigger, stronger, taller. I used heavy posts sunk deep into the soil, reinforced with concrete and panels high enough that no one could peek over without standing on something. This time, I made sure it wasn't just a fence, it was a fortress. Karen came out halfway through construction, her mouth hanging open like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. I turned to her calmly, hammer in hand. "Rebuilding my fence. On my land. This isn't your land," she snapped, jabbing her finger toward the dirt. "It's common property." That's when I pulled out a copy of the deed. Cashly, it is. Bought and paid for. County records are all updated. The way her face twisted at that moment, it was like I'd stolen her crown. She sputtered, shook her head, then stormed off, muttering about calling the HOA and her lawyer. But there was nothing she could do. The land was mine, legally mine. And the fence went up, brick by brick, board by board. By the time it was finished, the shortcut was gone. Karen's once convenient path to the street was sealed shut behind a wall of cedar and iron. She had to walk the long way around. It's like everyone else in the neighborhood. But I didn't stop there. Since I owned the boundary strip, I added a gate. A big, heavy gate with a lock. My lock. The only access point to that shortcut now ran through me. And here's where the twist came in. I offered access to the shortcut, a price. Neighbors who wanted the convenience could buy. A key for a small monthly fee. Most weren't interested. They were perfectly fine taking the sidewalk like normal people. But Karen, she was furious. She had destroyed my fence to take what wasn't hers. And in the end, she was the one locked out. She tried everything, complaints to the HOA. Angry letters, even filing a noise complaint when I had contractors working on the fence. But every time she pushed, the law was on my side. Hide the deed, the permits, and the patience to outlast her. The irony was delicious. Karen had fought so hard for her shortcut, only to end up walking farther than before. And every time she stomped past my property, glaring at the fence. I could see the realization dawning on her. She hadn't just lost a battle. She had lost control. But I wasn't finished yet. I had plans for that strip of land, plans that would turn her shortcut into something much more permanent. Something that would remind her every single day of the mistake she made when she decided to smash through my fence. And that's when things took an even more unexpected turn. When the news about my purchase of the land broke, the neighborhood split in half. Some people applauded me, saying I had done the right thing by finally putting Karen in her place. Others whispered that I'd gone too far, but none of their opinions really mattered because the deed was mine, and with it came the ultimate control over the very strip of earth Karen had been so desperate to own and destroy. Karen, of course, didn't take it lightly. I remember her storming into my driveway the day after I filed the boundary paperwork with the county. Her face was red, and she was practically shaking. "You can't do this," she screamed. "You can't just buy up land around my property and trap me in like some kind of animal." I calmly looked at her and replied, "I didn't trap you. You did this to yourself the moment you tore down my fence. All I did was make sure you can't do it again." Her eyes darted around as if searching for backup, but there was no one there to rally to her cause this time. She had already alienated nearly everyone with her antics. Those who still tolerated her weren't about to risk siding with her now. Karen tried everything. She filed complaints with the HOA, but the HOA reminded her ironically that the land I purchased was private property and not under their jurisdiction. She contacted the city, but they shrugged it off since nothing illegal had been done. She even tried to file a lawsuit, claiming I was maliciously restricting her freedom of movement. But that case was laughed out of court the moment the judge saw the survey maps proving she still had full legal access to her home. Just not through my land anymore. Still, Karen wouldn't stop. One night, I caught her outside with a flashlight, trying to measure the property line herself. Another time, she tried to rally neighbors into signing a petition to force me to restore access. But most people just closed the door in her face. By then, she had burned too many bridges. Meanwhile, I was having the time of my life designing my new boundary wall. Unlike the wooden fence she destroyed, this one was stone and steel. I hired contractors to build it tall, sturdy, and impossible to climb without effort. When it was finished, it stood like a fortress, sealing Karen in the day the last section went up. Karen stood in her yard screaming at the workers, calling me names I won't even repeat. But her insults bounced off me as easily as raindrops. Because in that moment, I knew I had finally won. Weeks went by, and Karen's desperation started to show. Without her shortcut through my yard, she had to drive all the way around the block every time she left her house. It wasn't even that long of a detour, maybe 3 extra minutes, but to Karen, it was a mortal insult. She complained to anyone who would listen about how unfair it was, how I was punishing her, how she was being imprisoned in her own home. What made it even sweeter was when the property taxes rolled in. I now owned the strip of land she used to trespass on. The value of my property went up, while hers actually decreased. Appraisers considered her home landlocked with limited access appeal. Her tantrums were costing her real money. But then came the twist I never saw coming. One morning, I woke up to find a for sale sign planted in Karen's yard. At first, I thought it was a prank, but no, Karen was actually selling her house. After months of fighting, screaming, and trying to tear me down, she finally admitted defeat. The day of the open house, I stood by my window sipping coffee, watching as prospective buyers toured her home. Most of them, of course, asked about the towering wall at the property line. Some seemed amused, others curious, but Karen had no good answers. Every time she mentioned it, her face twisted with bitterness. Eventually, a family bought the house, And within a few weeks, Karen was gone. No dramatic farewell, no last-ditch attempt to reclaim her power. Just silence. She packed up her things and disappeared, leaving behind only the memory of her chaos. The new neighbors. Wonderful people. They knocked on my door to introduce themselves, thanked me for keeping the boundaries so secure, and even brought a bottle of wine as a peace offering. For the first time in years, the street actually felt like a community again. Looking back, I realized Karen thought she could bulldoze her way through life, just like she bulldozed through my fence. But sometimes, the harder you push against someone who's willing to stand firm, the more you end up trapping yourself. In her attempt to take what wasn't hers, she lost everything she thought she controlled. And me? I got exactly what I wanted. Peace, privacy, and the satisfaction of knowing that when push came to shove, the law was on my side, and Karen's schemes collapsed under the weight of her own arrogance. So, if you ever find yourself up against someone like Karen's, someone who believes rules don't apply to them, someone who destroys instead of respects, just remember patience, persistence, and a little creativity can go a long way. Sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting back. Sometimes it's simply owning the land they thought they could walk all over. And that's exactly what I did at the end of the day. It wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for what's right. Karen tried to take a shortcut through my life, but I made sure she learned the long way around. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, remember, underestimate the quiet neighbor.